Humans are terrifying when morals have an expiry date. A four-part HFY story outline. Part 1. The diplomatic facade setting. The Galactic Council Chambers. 2347. Humanity has been part of the interstellar community for 73 years. Introduction. Ambassador Chun represents humanity at an emergency council session. The insectoid crystal hive has invaded the peaceful Virine colonies, enslaving millions. The council debates sanctions and strongly worded condemnations. Chun calmly requests a 30-day humanitarian corridor for evacuations. Key scene. In private. The Reptilian Council Chair Sereth commends Chun on humanity's evolved restraint. They note how humans have embraced galactic civilization, abandoning their primitive warlike nature. Chun smiles and says nothing. The crystal representative openly mocks humanity's weakness, recalling how humans once fought wars but now file paperwork. Your species has grown soft among the stars. Turning point. Chun's smile doesn't waver as she activates her holocom. You have 30 days. After that, our morals regarding the sanctity of sentient life expire. The crystal laugh. The other species look uncomfortable, not understanding the threat. Revelation. As Chun leaves, she passes a memorial hologram listing the human genocides, world wars, and atrocities of Earth's history. The placard reads, "Never again, unless you make us remember." Part 2. The warning sign setting. Days 1 to 28 of the humanitarian corridor. Various locations across crystal-occupied space and human territories. The evacuation. Human ships arrive in overwhelming numbers, rescuing Virine refugees. The operation is flawlessly executed with military precision that disturbs other council species. They move like a war fleet pretending to be merchants. Observes a Sereth military analyst. Cultural shift. On human worlds and ships, a visible change occurs. Museums open special exhibits. Veterans of Earth's last wars, now over 150 years ago, are interviewed on every network. Children learn songs that haven't been sung in generations. The Virine refugees notice humans watching historical documentaries about Sherman's March, the Mongol conquests, and the resource wars with disturbing intensity. The crystal response. Emboldened by perceived weakness, the crystal expand their invasion to 3 more systems. They broadcast executions of Virine who resisted, sending the footage directly to human channels as mockery. Come save them. If you dare. Ignored warnings. A junior crystal intelligence officer discovers something terrifying in human historical databases. Humanity's wars didn't end because they became peaceful. They ended because humanity became too efficient at killing itself. His report is dismissed by his superiors. Herbivores cannot become predators. The countdown. On day 29, every human ship evacuates crystal space. Every human diplomat files leave from their posts. Every human trade agreement is suspended. The council is confused. Ambassador Chun sends one final message to the Crystal Empress. We asked nicely. You said no. Our morals have now expired. Final scene. In human space, reserve fleets that haven't moved in a century power up. Weapons platforms, thought to be decommissioned, activate. And every human adult receives a notification on their devices. Referendum result, 78% approval. Total war authorization, granted. Moral constraints, suspended. Duration, until threat eliminated. Part 3. When the leash breaks setting, day 30 onwards. Crystal Space and the Galactic Council. The first strike. Human fleets don't arrive in Crystal Space. They materialize from FTL jumps, calculated to impossible precision, appearing in perfect attack formations inside defensive perimeters. The war opens with the simultaneous destruction of 40 crystal military installations in 12 seconds. No warnings. No negotiations. Tactical brutality. Other species watch in horror as humans fight with calculated viciousness. They target supply lines, destroy industrial capacity, and wage information warfare that turns crystal colonies against their own empress. A Sirith military observer notes, they don't fight to win battles. They fight to erase the opponent's ability to wage war. Psychological warfare. Humans broadcast messages into crystal space, videos of their own history's worst moments, demonstrating what humans do when morals are removed. This is what we did to ourselves. Imagine what we'll do to you. Crystal morale collapses on 3 core worlds. The Council's response. Emergency session. Species that once praised humanity's civility now demand intervention. You're committing atrocities. Ambassador Chun, now wearing a military uniform rather than diplomatic attire, responds coldly, no, we're committing efficiency. You wanted us civilized. You got us civilized. But you forced us to remember what we were before civilization. This is your fault as much as theirs. The revelation. A Vereen historian shares her discovery with the Council. Human morality isn't natural to them. It's a learned behavior, a conscious choice their species makes every single day against their evolutionary nature. They're persistent predators who learned empathy. But learning isn't the same as instinct. And they've just chosen to unlearn. Quick-style desperation. The Empress sues for peace after losing 1/3 of her territory in 2 weeks. Chum's response is broadcast galaxy-wide. You had peace. You chose war. Now you have war. When we're finished, you'll understand why humanity chose to chain itself with morals. Closing scene. A human soldier, decorated with medals from the pacification campaigns, sits with a young Vereen child they rescued. The child asks, "Are you a good person?" The soldier stares at distant explosions in orbit and whispers, "I used to be. Ask me again when this is over." Part 4. The Price of Remembering. Setting. The war's conclusion and its aftermath. The end of the crystal. 3 months after it began, the war ends. The Crystal Hive exists, but barely. Their military is gone. Their empress is in custody. Their enslaved populations have been freed. Human fleets occupy their core worlds, not as conquerors, but as peacekeepers ensuring reparations. The efficiency with which humanity dismantled a galactic power terrifies everyone. The Council's judgment. The Galactic Council convenes to judge humanity's conduct. Evidence of proportionality violations, civilian infrastructure targeting, and psychological torture is presented. Ambassador Chun doesn't contest the facts. You wanted the Vereen saved. They're saved. You wanted the crystal stopped. They're stopped. We did what you couldn't and wouldn't. And yes, we broke your rules. They were written by species who've never had to save themselves. The Vereen testimony. The freed Vereen present a counter-petition. Their representative speaks. We researched humanity after they rescued us. We learned about their Geneva Conventions, their rules of war, their concept of war crimes. They built these rules to stop themselves, not to stop others. They knew what they were capable of and chose restraint. Then the crystal forced them to choose survival over restraint. Don't punish them for saving us. Thank them and fear them. In that order. Humanity's choice. The referendum to restore moral constraints passes with 89% approval. UN fleets return to their borders. Museums close the war exhibits. The songs stop. But everyone notices that veterans don't put away their uniforms immediately this time. Just in case becomes humanity's unofficial motto. The new galactic order. Diplomatic relations resume, but everything has changed. Trade partners triple-check their contracts. Border disputes near human space get resolved with unusual speed. The Council passes the human protocols. a list of actions that, if taken against humanity or their allies, will be considered existential threats. The Crixtel Empress signs first. Saris the Standing. Council Chair Saris meets privately with Chun, who has returned to diplomatic attire. I understand now. Your morals aren't a weakness you shed. They're a leash you wear. And you're terrifying because you choose to wear it. Chun nods. Every single day. It's the hardest thing our species has ever done. And you made us remember how easy it is to take off. The memorial. Earth builds a new monument. A statue of a human figure holding chains that are broken but not discarded. The inscription reads, "In memory of what we were. In honor of what we chose to become. In warning of what we remain capable of." Morals are not weakness. They are the chains by which humanity binds itself. But chains can break. And breaking them terrifies us most of all. Final scene. A young human child on a colony world asks their grandmother, a veteran of the Crixtel campaign, "Are we the good guys?" The grandmother looks at the stars, where human and alien ships now patrol together, and replies, "We're trying to be. Every day, we wake up and try to be." And that's the most human thing about us. Not that we're capable of terrible things, but that we choose not to do them. Remember that choice, sweetheart. It's the only thing separating us from monsters. Epilogue text. 50 years later, the galaxy knows peace. Not because war is impossible, but because everyone remembers what happens when humanity stops trying to be civilized. The greatest deterrent isn't humanity's weapons or tactics. It's the memory of what humanity becomes when morals have an expiry date. And the knowledge that humanity sets that date themselves. Themes explored throughout. The conscious nature of human morality is choice, not instinct. The terrifying efficiency of humans when ethical constraints are removed. The price of peace and weather. Civilization is natural or learned. The responsibility of power and the burden of self-restraint. The galaxy's complicity in forcing humanity to unleash its darker nature. Part 2. The human ships arrived in Viren space on day 2. There were hundreds of them. Transport vessels, medical frigates, supply haulers, and enough escort ships to make the Crixtel military nervous. They moved in perfect formation, like they had practiced this 1,000 times. On the Viren homeworld, a young mother named Selmara watched the sky as human shuttles descended. She clutched her daughter close, not sure if these aliens were better than the ones who had invaded. But the Crixtel were hunting her people in the streets. She had no choice but to trust. A human stepped off the shuttle. He was tall, with dark skin and kind eyes. He wore a uniform that said Rescue Corps, but Selmar noticed how it fit like military gear, how his eyes swept the area like a soldier checking for threats. "Ma'am," he said through his translator, "my name is Marcus Cole. We're here to get you somewhere safe. Do you have other family members?" "Just my daughter," Selmar whispered. "My husband was killed last week." Something flickered across the human's face. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "I'm sorry for your loss. Come with me. We have food, water, and medical care on the ship." She followed him onto the shuttle. Inside were dozens of other Viren, all looking scared and lost. A human woman was passing out blankets. Another was scanning everyone with a medical device. Everything was organized, efficient, calm. "You've done this before," Selmara said. Marcus glanced at her. "Long time ago. We got good at moving refugees when we were moving our own people." "During your wars?" "Yeah." He didn't elaborate. Over the next week, human ships pulled millions of Viren from the occupied zones. They worked day and night, following the evacuation corridors exactly as agreed. The Crixtel watched but didn't interfere. They were too busy consolidating their conquest. But something strange was happening in human space. Selmara noticed it when her refugee ship reached Earth's orbital stations. There were warships everywhere. Old ones, she thought at first. Then she realized they weren't old. They were museum pieces being brought back to active duty. On Earth itself, the culture was changing. Marcus showed her to a refugee center in what he called North America. The humans there were friendly, helpful, kind. But every screen in the facility was showing something disturbing. Historical documentaries, programs about ancient human wars, interviews with old soldiers talking about battles from 200 years ago. One channel was showing footage of human cities destroying each other with weapons so terrible that Selmara had to look away. "Why are you watching this?" she asked Marcus. He stared at the screen, where a human city was burning. Remembering what? What we used to be. What we stopped being. He looked at her. What we might need to be again. On day 12, the Crystal Empress made a broadcast. Selmara watched it with growing horror. 3 more species had been invaded. Crystal forces were expanding in every direction. And to demonstrate their power, they had selected a Virian city that had resisted. The broadcast showed the executions. Thousands of her people, killed slowly, painfully. The transmission was sent directly to human networks. A message from Ziktar accompanied it. "Come and save them, if you dare." Selmara watched Marcus watch the footage. His face went completely blank. Not sad, not angry, just empty. When it was over, he stood and walked out without saying a word. That night, she noticed human children singing songs she hadn't heard before. Old songs from centuries past. War songs. Battle hymns. Songs about victory and vengeance and never surrendering. On day 15, a Crystal intelligence officer named Victor made a discovery. He had been analyzing human history, looking for weaknesses. What he found instead terrified him. Human wars hadn't ended because humans became peaceful. They ended because humans had become too good at killing each other. The last major conflict, the Resource Wars, had killed 500 million people in 10 years. After that, humanity had collectively decided to stop. Not because they couldn't fight anymore, because they were afraid of what they would do if they didn't stop. Victor wrote an urgent report to his superiors. The humans are not weak. They are restrained. There is a significant difference. I recommend we honor the evacuation agreement and seek diplomatic resolution. His commander read the report and dismissed it. One species cannot threaten the hive, continue operations. Vuctal filed the report anyway. He copied it to 17 different departments. He marked it urgent. No one paid attention. In the Crystal Hive, individual initiative was discouraged. Orders from the Empress were absolute. On day 20, human behavior shifted again. Selmara saw it in the refugee centers. The humans were still kind, still helpful. But there was a tension in the air. Conversations were quieter. Faces were harder. Marcus came to check on her that evening. "How are you settling in?" "I'm grateful," Selmara said. "But Marcus, what's happening?" "Everyone seems different." He sat down heavily. "We took a vote. Every human adult gets to participate in major decisions. We voted on whether to authorize military action against the Crystal, and 78% said yes." He looked at his hands. "We also voted on something else. Whether to suspend our rules of war. The ethical guidelines we follow during conflicts." Selmara felt cold. "Did that pass?" 61%. His voice was hollow. "We've never done that before. Even in our worst wars, we kept some rules. Some lines we wouldn't cross. What changed? They killed your people and sent us the footage. They threatened to come to Earth. They're expanding into peaceful species territory." He met her eyes. "And we realized something. We built all these rules to stop ourselves from becoming monsters. But when actual monsters show up, those rules just tie our hands. On day 28, every human ship left crystal space. The evacuation was complete. Millions of Virion had been saved. But the crystal were celebrating. The humans had run away. The soft species had proven its weakness. Ambassador Chen sent one final message to the Crystal Empress. Selmara watched it broadcast across every network. "We asked nicely," Chen said. Her diplomatic smile was gone. She wore a military uniform now. "You said no. You expanded your war. You executed prisoners. You threatened our homeworld. We gave you 30 days to reconsider." The hologram showed a countdown timer. It read 47 hours, 23 minutes. "When this timer reaches 0, Chung continued, our moral constraints regarding warfare will officially expire. We tried civilization. You rejected it. Now you get the alternative." The transmission ended. Marcus stood with Selmara on an observation deck, watching Earth below them. Warships were gathering, thousands of them. The largest military mobilization humanity had conducted in 2 centuries. "Can you win?" Selmara asked. Marcus didn't answer for a long time. When he did, his voice was strange, sad, resigned, frightening. "We won't just win," he said quietly. "That's what scares me. We're going to show them exactly why we spent 200 years trying so hard to be civilized. We're going to show them what we were before civilization, what we still are underneath." The countdown continued. The galaxy held its breath, and humanity remembered what it had spent centuries trying to forget. The countdown reached 0 at exactly 600 Standard Galactic Time on day 30. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Crixtel military commanders relaxed slightly. Perhaps the humans had been bluffing after all. Then the human fleets disappeared. They didn't fly toward Crystal space. They didn't accelerate to faster-than-light speeds in any detectable direction. They simply vanished from every sensor in human territory. All of them, simultaneously. 12 seconds later, they reappeared inside Crystal space. The humans had calculated FTL jumps with impossible precision, materializing in perfect attack formations within the defensive perimeters of 40 Crystal military installations. Before the Crystal could react, before they could raise shields or scramble fighters, the human ships opened fire. 40 installations went dark in the first volley. The war had begun. In the Galactic Council chambers, emergency alarms were screaming. Ambassador Sireth pulled up tactical displays with shaking hands. They just destroyed 12 years of Crystal military construction in 12 seconds. How is that possible? A military analyst, a gray-furred species called the Vorn, stared at the data. They didn't fight their way in. They appeared exactly where they needed to be. The calculations required for that many simultaneous jumps. He trailed off, unable to comprehend it. "Show me their assault patterns," Sireth demanded. The displays lit up with human fleet movements. The Vorn analyst's fur stood on end. They're not fighting battles. They're executing extermination protocols. Look at the targets. Supply depots, factory worlds, communication relays. They're not trying to defeat the Crystal military. They're trying to erase its ability to exist. On the Crystal homeworld, Empress Zarkith watched her empire begin to crumble. Reports flooded in from every front. The humans weren't just attacking. They were dismantling. Every strategic asset, every logistical hub, every industrial center was being systematically destroyed. "Where is Ambassador Ziktar?" She screeched. "Dead, Highness." Her military commander bowed low. His ship was in the first wave of attacks. "The humans eliminated all our diplomatic vessels before we could surrender." "Surrender?" We haven't even fought back yet. Highness, they haven't given us time to fight back. They're too fast, too precise. It's like they already knew where everything was before the war started. They had. For 2 centuries, human intelligence services had been mapping the galaxy. Not for conquest. Just in case. Just in case civilization failed, and they needed to remember how to wage war efficiently. On the Viren refugee station, Selmara watched the news broadcasts with her daughter. Human ships were everywhere in Crickstale space, moving like a swarm of predators. But something was bothering her. "Marcus," she called. He was standing nearby, watching the same feeds. "Why aren't there more casualties? I see installations exploding, but the population centers are untouched." Marcus's expression was grim. "We're not trying to kill Crickstale civilians. We're trying to break their military. But that doesn't mean we're being nice about it." On her screen, a human broadcast was being transmitted into Crickstale space. Selmara listened in horror as a calm human voice narrated footage from Earth's history. Wars that had consumed continents. Weapons that had poisoned entire regions. Strategies so brutal that she couldn't believe any species would use them on themselves. "This is what we did to each other," the voice said. "This is what humans do when we stop caring about morality. When we decide that victory matters more than ethics. You forced us to remember this. You forced us to become this again." The psychological impact was immediate. 3 Crickstale colony worlds surrendered within hours, their populations refusing to fight. Morale across the hive collapsed. They had thought humans were soft. Instead, they had awakened something that had been deliberately sleeping. In the council chambers, an emergency session was called. Species from across the galaxy demanded explanations. Ambassador Chun attended, still in her military uniform. "You're committing atrocities," shouted Ambassador Thelkor. His blue skin had turned almost purple with rage. "You're destroying infrastructure that will take decades to rebuild. You're crippling an entire civilization." "No," Chun said coldly. "We're dismantling a military threat. Every target has been strategic. Every strike has been calculated. We haven't touched hospitals, schools, or residential areas. We're following the laws of war." "What laws?" Sereth demanded. "You voted to suspend your ethical guidelines." "We suspended our limitations," Chun corrected. "Not our humanity. There's a difference. We're not killing civilians. We're not using weapons of mass destruction. We're not torturing prisoners. We're just not handicapping ourselves with unnecessary mercy for military targets." A new voice entered the discussion. A Viren representative, one of the millions rescued by humans. Diplomat Velkara stood before the council. "I have studied human warfare," Velkara said quietly. "I have read their histories since arriving on Earth. Do you know what I learned? Humans created rules for war. The Geneva Conventions. The rules of engagement. Prohibitions against certain weapons and tactics. They created these rules not to stop other species. They created them to stop themselves." The chamber was silent. "Humans knew what they were capable of," Velkara continued. "They knew the darkness in their own nature. So they built cages around it. Laws, ethics, morals. They chained themselves because they were afraid of what they would do without chains. And now?" whispered Sirith. "Now the Crickstyle forced them to unlock those cages. Not fully, but enough." Velkara looked at Chen. "You're still following some rules. But you've removed the ones that made you vulnerable. The ones that prioritized enemy welfare over your own effectiveness." Chen nodded slowly. "We're doing what's necessary. Nothing more, but nothing less." "How long?" asked the Vorn analyst. "How long can the Crickstyle last?" Chun checked her wrist display. "At current rate of operations, The Crystal Hive will lose its ability to wage offensive warfare in 6 days. Complete military collapse within 3 weeks. We're not trying to conquer them. We're trying to ensure they never threaten anyone again. Ambassador Ziktar's replacement, a young crystal named Sekthar, entered the chamber. He looked broken, defeated. The Empress wishes to negotiate surrender. No, Chun said flatly. Every ambassador stared at her. You don't get to surrender yet, Chun continued. You started this war after we asked nicely to stop. You killed prisoners and broadcast it to traumatize us. You threatened our homeworld. Surrender is a privilege. You haven't earned it. What do you want? Sekthar's voice was barely a whisper. Complete demilitarization. Reparations to every species you've harmed. Crystal territory under human oversight for 50 years. Your Empress stands trial for war crimes. Every single slave you've taken is freed and compensated. Chun's eyes were hard. And you exist only because we choose to let you exist. Because unlike you, we remember that there are still some lines civilized species don't cross. Sekthar collapsed. You've destroyed us. Yes, Chun agreed. That was the point. You mistook our civilization for weakness. You forgot that we chose to be civilized. Choice can be revoked. The war continued. By the end of the first week, the Crystal Hive controlled less territory than it had held before the Vereen invasion. Human ships patrolled their space, not as conquerors but as wardens. And across the galaxy, every species learned a lesson they would never forget. Humanity's morals weren't weakness. They were a gift. A choice humans made every day to be better than their nature demanded. But when those morals expired, what remained wasn't random violence or mindless rage. What remained was efficiency, calculation, the cold, terrifying competence of a species that had learned warfare by practicing on itself for thousands of years. The galaxy had wanted humanity to be civilized. They got their wish. But they forgot to be grateful for it. 3 months after the war began, it ended. The Crystal Empress signed the surrender documents in the council chambers, her mandibles trembling. Human warships occupied her core worlds. Her military was gone. Her empire existed only because humanity permitted it. Ambassador Chun watched the signing with no satisfaction on her face. Victory felt hollow when you had to become someone else to achieve it. The next day, a different vote was held across human space. Selmara watched it from her new home on Earth. Every human adult voted on a single question. Should we restore full moral constraints on military operations? 89% voted yes. Marcus came to visit her that evening. He was out of uniform now, wearing simple civilian clothes. But something in his eyes had changed. He looked older, tired. It's over, Selmara said. Yeah. He sat heavily. We're putting the chains back on. Do you regret it? What you did? Marcus was quiet for a long time. We saved your people. We stopped the Crystal from enslaving the galaxy. We did what needed doing. He paused. But every night, I see those installations exploding. I know we only hit military targets. I know we followed the rules we set for ourselves. But I also know that we were efficient about destruction in a way that scares me. You were at war. We're always capable of war, Marcus corrected. We just choose not to be at war most of the time. That's different. And now we have to remember how easy it was to make that choice go away. Across human space, veterans were returning to civilian life. Museums were closing their war exhibits. The historical documentaries stopped playing. The old songs were put away. But this time, something was different. The uniforms stayed near the closet doors. The emergency protocols stayed active. Veterans groups met regularly, just to stay ready. Just in case. became humanity's new unofficial motto. In the Galactic Council, a special session was convened to judge humanity's conduct during the war. Evidence was presented. Destroyed installations, crippled economies, psychological warfare tactics. The prosecution argued that humanity had gone too far. Ambassador Chun stood to respond. She didn't contest the facts. Everything you've shown is accurate. We destroyed infrastructure. We used psychological tactics. We crippled the Crixtale economy. And we did it all with calculated precision. You admit to violating the spirit of galactic law, demanded a prosecutor. I admit to doing what you couldn't and wouldn't do, Chun replied. The Virian were being exterminated. You formed committees. The Crixtale threatened multiple species. You wrote strongly worded letters. We acted. We saved lives. We stopped a threat. Yes, we broke some of your rules. Rules written by species who've never had to save themselves from extinction. Before the council could respond, Velkara stood. The Virian diplomat had prepared a counter-petition signed by millions of rescued Virian. We researched humanity after they saved us, Velkara said. We studied their history. We learned about their rules of war, the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Regulations, international humanitarian law. Do you know what's remarkable about these documents? Humans created them to limit themselves, not to limit others, themselves. She pulled up a holographic display. Humans banned certain weapons not because enemies used them, but because humans had used them. They prohibited tactics not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. They built an entire legal framework around making war less terrible. And they did it because they knew what they were capable of. The council chamber was silent. The Crixtale forced humanity to set aside some of those protections, Velkara continued. Not all of them. Humans still didn't target civilians. Still didn't use their worst weapons. Still followed rules, just fewer rules. And even with fewer rules, they were devastating. Imagine what they could do with no rules at all. She turned to face the entire council. Don't punish them for saving us. Thank them. And fear them. In that order. Because they chose to save us. They could have chosen not to care. They could have watched us die from behind their borders. But they didn't. They remembered their humanity, even while setting aside some of their constraints. The vote to condemn humanity failed. Badly. But something else happened in the council that day. A new set of protocols was drafted, debated, and passed. The human protocols outlined specific actions that, if taken by any species, would be considered existential threats warranting immediate response. The first species to sign was the Crixtale Hive. 5 years later, Selmara took her daughter to Earth's newest memorial. It stood in Geneva, where humans had once signed their first agreements about how to limit warfare. The memorial was a statue of a human figure holding broken chains. Not discarded, not destroyed, just broken, but still held. The inscription read, "Morals are not weakness. They are the chains by which humanity binds itself. But chains can break. And we are most terrified of what happens when they do." Selmara's daughter, now 10 years old, read it carefully. "Mama, are humans scary?" Selmara thought about Marcus, who still visited them regularly. About Chun, who had returned to diplomatic work but never quite smiled the same way. About all the humans who had saved her people and then quietly returned to being teachers, doctors, artists, farmers. Yes, she said honestly, but not because they're violent. Because they choose not to be. Every single day, they wake up and choose to be kind instead of efficient. To be civilized instead of brutal. That choice is what makes them human. And it's what makes them terrifying. I don't understand. You will when you're older. Selmara hugged her daughter. The humans could have destroyed the crystal completely. They could have enslaved them or scattered them or erased them from history. They had the power. They had the justification. But they didn't. They stopped. They chose mercy after they had won. That's the difference between humans and monsters. Monsters don't choose. Humans always choose. In the council chambers, 50 years later, a new generation of ambassadors gathered. The Crystal War was ancient history to them. A story told to young diplomats about what happens when you push humanity too far. The human ambassador was a young woman named Sarah Chen, granddaughter of the famous ambassador. She gave a speech about galactic cooperation and shared prosperity, about building bridges between species, about choosing civilization. After the session, the Vorn ambassador approached her privately. Your grandmother was formidable. She terrified everyone. Sarah smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and friendly. She used to tell me that the easiest thing in the world is to be terrible. That humanity had spent 10,000 years being terrible to itself. The hard part, she said, was choosing to be better. Choosing it every single day, even when being terrible would be easier. And do you make that choice? Every day, Sarah said. Every single day. It's the most human thing about us. The Vorn studied her. And if someone forces you to stop choosing? If another species pushes humanity like the crystal did? Sarah's smile didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something old. Something that had been passed down through generations. Then we set a timer. And we warned them. And we hope they're smarter than the last species that made us count down. And if they're not, then they learn the same lesson. Sarah's voice was soft, almost sad. That humanity's morals aren't weakness. They're a gift. And gifts can be revoked. She walked away, leaving the Vorn ambassador standing there. He thought about the memorial on Earth, about the broken chains still held, about a species that had learned to chain itself and was terrified of breaking free. The galaxy had peace. Not because war was impossible. Not because conflicts never arose. But because everyone remembered what happened when humanity stopped trying to be civilized. The greatest deterrent wasn't humanity's weapons, though they had plenty. It wasn't their tactics, though those were devastating. It wasn't their technology, though it was advanced. The greatest deterrent was memory. The memory of what humanity became when morals had an expiry date. The memory that humanity set that date themselves. And the knowledge that they could do it again. Humans had proven they could be monsters. But more importantly, they had proven they could choose not to be. And that choice, renewed every single day by billions of humans across hundreds of worlds, was what kept the galaxy safe, not from humanity, but from anyone foolish enough to make humanity stop choosing. The chains remained broken, but held. A reminder, a warning, a promise. Never again. Unless you make us remember.